Okay, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences and knowledge about global hiring, about remote work, and etc. So, our guest today is Elena Stefanopol, Director of Recruiting at Labelbox. Elena, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you about all remote work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and before we start, could you please briefly introduce yourself and maybe tell us a few words about how you became remote work advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from Romania. I moved, quite a bit. I was in London for a couple of years before I moved to San Francisco, and then Austin, and then Denver. I think, personally, I'm still kind of trying to find my place. And, from that point of view, work is also a very important part of my life, obviously. And so I've always had this kind of dream, even when I was, little, like, wouldn't it be cool to just be able to do your work from home? And it was so wild to even think about it back then.
Hmm.
And it's unfortunate that it took us a whole pandemic to realize that this is doable. But kind of looking at the silver lining, I'm really excited for this kind of new chapter that I'm seeing in all industries, but mostly in tech. And yeah, I mean, to really take advantage of this remote work, I was traveling in South America for a full year. I just came back in April and still working for Labelbox, which
Hmm.
is absolutely amazing. And yeah, I mean, it kind of, as I said, I'm trying to find my place even professionally, and
Hmm.
I feel like have found it at Labelbox. And all of the pieces kind of click together, so I'm really happy that everything is happening. But yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, a little bit about myself, recruiting wise. I've been doing recruiting for over 10 years, I think, at this point. And I've been with Labelbox for the past almost three, which is in startup, years is pretty long.
Right.
Um, and yeah, before that, I was at Airbnb. And then before that, I worked with a lot of very small startups in the Bay Area, mostly US.
Hmm.
And then for my European experience, as I said, I was in London for a couple of years and also Poland recruiting a little bit for that London based company.
Okay.
So, a little bit of everything.
Hmm. Okay, sounds cool. And like you mentioned, you've been this in remote work for a while, right? So, can you maybe share some insights into how remote work has evolved over the years, and what changes you have observed, in this
Mhm.
global hiring landscape?
It's interesting to look at it because, it's nuanced, right? There's still certain
Yeah.
companies who want to bring people back into the office and they have their reasons. I'm not here to judge, but
Hmm.
there's also people and companies who have truly just embraced the fully remote work, and obviously there's a bunch of advantages to that, which I very much align with. um, I think for me, personally, for recruiting specifically, I've been able to access a larger talent pool when
Hmm.
you remove that location requirement. Like the
Right.
world is your oyster, right? And so obviously there are some things that we need to keep in mind and be mindful of when we do hire and work with people who are across different time zones. But it's been really yeah, just opening of a like new markets, new talent,
Hmm.
accessing talent that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to. And so it's been really cool to see, even startups. Um, they're kind of like three categories, like the ones who are like, yes, this sounds absolutely amazing, full like 100% in, and
Hmm.
then there's the ones that are hybrid, and again, there's different reasons for each, and then the ones that are in the office or want to get back into the office. So um, we can spend this whole time talking about the
Right.
differences for all of them, but at Labelbox, we're 100% remote. We do have, and we have noticed that there is a need for in-person connection, but we don't make that part of a requirement to be able to do your work.
Uh-huh.
We just balance that out with certain events that we have in person. So, for example, we have
Hmm.
a company planning meeting. It's everybody in the company in January, and that's kind of where we do all our planning for the year, which is super exciting. And then we also have another big one in the summer, which, a lot of trainings and like, but also a lot of fun and in-person connection. So that
Hmm.
really we found it's a perfect balance to have the remote work, but also get that in-person connection too.
Okay. And speaking about Labelbox, I know that you, like you mentioned this, that you made a decision to remain a remote company even after this COVID-19 pandemic, right? So can you maybe elaborate on the advantages you have observed in having a fully distributed team, especially after companies went back to the on-site mode? Like you mentioned, there are some of those companies, especially big ones, right? So they are moving back to office. So do you see any advantages, because you're still remote first company?
Yeah. So I mean, to be fair, with Labelbox, we were remote friendly from the beginning. So the
Hmm.
company started in San Francisco, and we had a little office there. We still have it. It's a space for people who are in the area. If they wanted to use it, they can.
Hmm.
But when I say small, it was like a 20 people office. The company was still very, very small when this whole thing hit. I joined when we were about 50, and that was already kind of midway through the pandemic. And so um yeah, we just decided to, obviously we had to adapt and make sure that everyone has a label box experience, a positive experience working for label box regardless of where they were in the world. And I think I alluded to this before, but one of the main points was really making sure that our managers and our people leaders know how to and are equipped to manage a remote distributed team, because then it becomes a little bit challenging. It kind of forces you to be very intentional, for example, with when you schedule your team meetings, right? Like, can
Hmm.
everyone make that meeting?
Hmm.
um, and also it kind of forces you to rethink your whole meeting structure, because do we really want to be in meetings all the time? Obviously it's not possible, but it's also not super productive. So how do we balance maybe working sessions, or focus time, or just working async? Like, what are those you know guidelines that we put in place so that
Hmm.
people are successful in this environment? So that was a learning curve for us, but I think we did a good job.
Okay.
But yeah, I think for the advantages, it's the obvious one. You have access to so many talented people. And if you want to go more granular, like for example, our DevOps, like you want to have coverage 24/7 in case something happens. Like, that's something you can achieve by having remote teams and making sure you have coverage, around the clock, without having to, have a night shift per se, right? So everyone wins. So yeah, I think it's been great. I personally love it. As I said, I can be an advocate for this all day long. And I've definitely, even for my team, I've been able to hire, you know, it's been, we can also talk about kind of the budget aspect as well. In certain areas, in certain regions, is obviously not as expensive to hire as, let's say, Bay Area, San Francisco. And so that can also be a very helpful lens through which you look at your headcount planning, at your overall budget. We've been trying to be very mindful of, keeping our team intact through all of this, this wave of layoffs and everything. In full transparency, we did have a reduction in force back in, last year, but again, very minimal to be able to kind of make it through this ambiguous time. But that really forced us to become more mature in like how we think about hiring, about headcount, about the cost to the business, about budgeting. So um, in a twisted way, I do have this, way of kind of looking for the silver lining everywhere. It really kind of forced us to be more mindful, better about like how we think about our resourcing.
Hmm.
And I think this these remote markets really play a big role in us being able to still grow in a mindful way and keep the business going.
Hmm. Okay. And speaking about the global hiring, right? So I know that Labelbox, I did some research in and found out that Labelbox has teams in Great Britain and in Poland, right? Do you have someone there?
Yeah, yeah.
And
So in London, yes, we do have mostly our kind of go-to market team
uh-huh.
in London, because obviously the EMEA region, we wanted to be able to serve that region. better than with a San Francisco
Right. Right.
based team. So again, kind of coming back to that time zone coverage.
Hmm.
Um, and we've been, I would say, like, our strategy has been more of an exploratory one initially, meaning when we realized, like, oh my God, we can hire anywhere,
Hmm.
obviously thinking through, okay, time zones and kind of the
Hmm.
logistical pieces. But then, that kind of leaves us with pretty much all of Europe with decent overlap with the US.
Right.
And so we didn't want to, we wanted to see how that would go first. And so we didn't really made any strict decisions on, oh, we're only going to hire in London or in Poland or whatever. We
Hmm.
just said, like, okay, let's entertain, let's get to know candidates from everywhere, and we do have, as you mentioned, London and Poland are kind of the little hubs that are forming,
Hmm.
but we do have other people like Croatia, Serbia,
Okay.
Hungary, like, there's people everywhere. Also, they're moving too. So at this point, I'm
Hmm.
just gonna say Europe. But yeah, so we have identified Poland as being, kind of a little hub in forming. So we're exploring if that's something that we want to,
So
move forward as a strategy with, like, creating little hubs. But this is something that, again, we're kind of exploring and seeing how it evolves.
so you didn't have any kind of criteria or considerations while you were
Well,
choosing the country to hire from.
no, not the country. I think for us, the most important thing is the quality of talent. And so if we find a great person for
Okay.
Labelbox, we're going to hire them.
Okay.
As I said, we have these kind of guidelines because we know that it would be very hard, for example, to
Hmm.
work with someone in, let's say, Asia from a time zone
Yeah,
perspective,
it makes sense.
just because we are a fairly small team. We're just 150,
Hmm.
together, like, all in all. And
Hmm.
so, if you think about, like, our engineering team is about 50 people, like, that's very small to be able to manage, like, that one or two person that are,
Yeah.
like, so far away. And
Yeah, it
so we
makes
need
sense.
to be mindful of that because that impacts their employment experience, with Labelbox. So just being realistic about what we can and cannot do, I think that's been really helpful.
Okay. And are there any kind of strategies or approaches you have found particularly effective in Europe? While maybe are there any differences with the US talent acquisition strategy, or it's the same?
I would say because of this, kind of global change to
Hmm.
remote work and more companies from the US, hiring more and more in Europe, I think candidates have also become more sophisticated, and, like, it's kind of leveling the playing field between, US and European, even offer negotiations and how you think about the roles and everything. But I do think there's obviously some differences, right? And we can't ignore them. um, for example, the interest in equity as part of the whole compensation package, that's kind of, varying. So there's a little bit of selling, a little bit of educating that we need to do there. Um, and then I would say probably the pace for some is a little bit, something that needs a little bit of adjustment to. For example, we're a tech startup, in the Bay Area, initially, and so you can imagine how fast we move. And so, I know and again, being European and having had that experience, I know most companies are not that fast paced. I think they're getting there, but, the US is like go, go, go. And so I feel that's a little bit of getting used to as well. But
Hmm.
when it comes to just getting to know the candidate through the process, interviewing them, we do
Hmm.
have a structured interview process to make sure
Hmm.
that we test and uncover all of the things that we need for that role at Labelbox. And so we're definitely just, making sure we get the right skill set in place.
Hmm.
So from, anything else, it could be anything else. Like, you can be anywhere else, but and you can have whatever experience. Let's say you're coming from a bigger company in Europe, like, we don't, hold that against you.
Hmm.
But, if you can go through our interview process and basically do the job, like, we're more than happy to have you.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's been really helpful to, again, kind of leveling the playing field a little bit.
Okay. So there are kind of no differences in your requirements compared to the requirements for engineers in the US and in Europe.
No, like we no. It's just like this is, what we need at Labelbox.
Right.
And I feel like we can find it anywhere. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the way we're the way we structure our interview process, the way we think about, scoping a role, it's very easy to for bias to creep in if we think that, oh, if you kind of have this mentality of us versus them, like that's not what I want to build at Labelbox or anywhere
Right.
else for that matter.
Right.
So for us, it's always just like talent. If we find talent, we get it. It's
Perfect.
that's
Okay.
that's what we need, right? Like that's why I'm here for recruiting, to make sure we
Right.
have the right talent in place. Yep.
Right, right. Okay, okay, sounds good. And when it comes to hiring from other countries, what type of hiring do you choose? Do you use do you hire those guys as contractors, or do you use some employee of record services like Deal, Oyster, or maybe you have your own entities in European countries?
Yeah. So for us, as I said, we kind of started in this journey of, hiring remotely, kind of with an exploration lens. And so the operational piece had to follow the same, train of thought. And so initially we hire on a contracting basis. That
Mm-hmm.
being said, that's just the legal kind of constraint. Like
Right.
everything else is the same for that person working with Labelbox. We don't make any differentiation between, oh, you're a contractor or, you're a full-time employee.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter. And so, similar to what happened in London, for example, we had, kind of a critical mass, about like 10-ish people in London. And that's when we decided, like, okay, it's time to incorporate an entity there and become an employer in London. And then we converted everybody to full-time employees with that entity. So that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of our approach, is like, that's why I was mentioning the little hubs that are forming.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we see there's like a bigger hub, then we kind of start exploring, if it's worth opening and registering in that country as an employer, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously, setting up the benefits and everything for everybody. It's interesting also working with the people there. Like, do you want to be, like a full-time employee, like on paper, of
Right.
course. So yeah, we just kind of work with the people that we have in those locations, see what they want, see what's feasible for us, and then kind of make the transition if that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, on your, I guess on your website, I noticed a couple vacancies that are marked as US based only, right? So
Hmm.
how do you decide which vacancies should be international, kind of, right, and which should be limited to the US only? Is it do you have some criteria like a time zone, team location, or anything like that?
Yeah. So some of them, I would say the main criteria is like what is the ability of the hiring team
Mm-hmm.
to accommodate for a different time zone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, so for example, as I said, like the whole engineering team is 50 people. We have obviously smaller teams within that department. And so, for example, if we have a team that is, let's say, predominantly in the US,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have anybody from Europe there, then
Mm-hmm.
that's a conversation to be like, okay, well, where in the US is the team? If they're all in the Pacific on PST,
Right.
then we need to be very mindful of how far east in Europe we can go, just to make sure there is enough overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the considerations. I would say, yeah, mainly time zone
Mm-hmm.
considerations, but um, yeah, other than that, not really. I would say that's the big one because that impacts everything, fortunately or unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we just need to be mindful of that. We
Yeah.
can't just go
Yeah.
hiring and say like, okay, good luck, manager. Figure it out. Like we need to make sure the whole team is equipped
Right.
to work with the person wherever they are, and also for that person to have a great experience and enough support when they're onboarding and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's probably the main considerant when figuring out, like, yes, let's say we have a very small team, 4 people, or all on the Pacific coast. That's going to be more of a conversation to see if we can really accommodate someone from Europe.
Yeah. And speaking about time zones, have you ever tried to hire someone from Latam, for example? It's very
Mm-hmm.
close. I mean, for example, Mexico is in the same time zone, right? Argentina, Brazil is very close to PST.
Yeah.
It's well, do you have some guys there?
We do have, or let's see, we did have a few people. I believe I might be mistaken, but I believe Paraguay and Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
um, potentially one Brazil, but
Okay.
don't quote me on that. But yeah, and that those happen more organically, as I said,
Mm-hmm.
like from that exploration kind of let's
Okay.
see how the market looks like for us. But I will say, for whatever reason, we had more success in the European market.
Okay.
That I'm still kind of thinking about why that is. It might just be, my experience with that European market. I might be more familiar, and that kind of trickles down there. I really don't know. So that's something that I'm looking into. But yes, you're right. From a time zone perspective, South America is pretty much on the same time zone,
Mm-hmm.
as the US and North America. So um, it is definitely doable from that perspective. It hasn't necessarily happened for us
Mm-hmm.
as much or as fast as in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Got it. Okay. And you touched this a bit, but still, what are some maybe key cultural or work ethic differences you have noticed while working internationally, while working with guys from Poland, from Serbia, um, or there are no like differences?
Well, I think there are, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
every culture is different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think from a working culture, we are very transparent from the get go
Mm-hmm.
as to what it takes to be successful at Labelbox.
Mm-hmm.
And we are very honest in saying that Labelbox might not be for everybody. Like
Yep.
as I said, we move very fast. We're pretty intense sometimes. Like, this whole industry of AI is really exciting right now and it's moving even faster. So there's no time to slow down, no time to just be a regular 9 to 5 and then not care about your work. And again, us being very honest and transparent about this. And I think because we're so honest, we even have it on our careers page on our on our operating principles. Like, we all care so much about what we do and making sure that Labelbox is successful, and that might not be in the 9 to 5 bracket at some days, and that's something that you need to be okay with, or buy into, if you want to be successful at Labelbox. And so, because we're so honest and transparent from the beginning, I think that also helps people to almost self-select and say, like, great, you do you, but like, this is not for me, and that's completely fair. That's why we wanted to be so transparent from the get-go. And throughout the process, the candidate gets to meet with the hiring teams, with the hiring manager, with other people from the company. So there's a lot of opportunity to ask about how it is to work at Labelbox, specifically for you who's interviewing me. Like, what's your experience? And then
Mm-hmm.
based on that, they can make a decision for themselves. But we don't hide that it's intense.
Right.
It's a startup. We're still growing,
Right.
and we're still developing new products, new features. Like, there's always something going on, which is obviously super exciting. But you need to be okay with that pace. So I would say, whatever the differences are, it doesn't really matter,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're okay with with our way of working, and
Okay.
if that aligns with you and what you want to do, great. If it doesn't, then we're not the best place for that.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, and for potential, let's say like data scientists, right, or this ML engineers who are listening to our podcast, what would you say are the top reasons maybe to consider joining Labelbox and how they can do that?
Yes. Well, I mean, I feel like for me it's very obvious because I'm in the middle of it. But you've probably heard all about, large language models and what's happening with the AI industry in general. And we are in that, like, there's nothing more exciting than this. I obviously biasly think at this point. And so being able to build tools and products for people to help people and companies advance AI for themselves. That's something that I can't even, like, express the true impact of. And I would say, for anyone who's curious about our impact, we do have a bunch of user stories on our website, and those are fascinating because they're from so many different industries. And that's part of the reason I joined Labelbox. We're not just focused on one industry. we are a platform, as I said, to help advance and align AI, and further AI. And so that can be applicable to pretty much everything. And so we have case studies from agriculture, marketing, fashion, like it's everywhere. So, we're there. We're making it happen. If you want to make it happen, join Labelbox.
Yeah, that's awesome. And probably my last question: do you have any advice for tech leaders or executives who are considering expanding in terms of global hiring and who are considering I don't know, just go to East Europe and hire someone from there or someone from Latam? What may be the key three key pieces of advice that you can give them?
I would say that's a great question. I would say first is important to really know and spend the time to figure out what exactly you need to hire for. So scoping the role, figuring out what is that profile that you need, what are the skills, the competencies, and really have clarity there. And that's honestly a piece of advice that is valid for anyone trying to recruit anywhere, but specifically when you go to a different culture, country, and so on, because then that really dictates everything that will happen. So like how you design your interview plan, what are the questions that you're asking. And so then I would say the second piece of advice is take that plan and kind of take it through the cultural lens. Meaning, as you said, there are differences between cultures. And so if you're not aware of how maybe your questions are coming across in different cultures, that might be problematic, hopefully not. But these are all things that you need to think through, like how is this the best question to ask? Am I asking it in the best possible way? Is it an inclusive way to ask this question? Am I actually like, what is this question even testing for? Because I think, we're all human. It's really easy to get into like the personal stuff, maybe sometimes, I don't know. And kind of, we all have biases, like, and just being aware of that, especially when you go into a new culture, being hyper aware of that. It's like my advice. And for example, the first thing that comes to mind is because I recently recruited in Europe for my team.
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of resumes that are still showing photos, like pictures of them, of the candidate on the resume, plus
Hmm.
all of this like personal information, like date of
Right.
birth and like full address and everything. So that's a little bit of a shocker. So I had to coach my team who's US based and say like, yes, this is something that happens in Europe. We need to like black out that part and just focus on the experience. So these are all things that you just need to be aware of and not dismiss someone because they put a photo of themselves, on the resume. That's just a
Hmm.
cultural difference that you need to be aware and understand it and like move past it. So yeah, and third, just be a nice inclusive human. I think, and that's regardless of what you do, um be curious, like yes, there are different cultures, but people are people. Like just be curious of like where they're coming
Hmm.
from, like what's the context.
Hmm.
Don't be so quick to make a judgment call on something or an
Hmm.
assumption. Assumptions are very dangerous. So just
Right.
ask.
Right. Okay, perfect. So I guess we're good. Thanks a lot, Elena, for sharing your insights on international hiring, remote first culture, this challenges and obstacles of global hiring. And yeah, we wish you all the best in your journey. And thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.